Well, good morning in London and good evening in Xi'an, and welcome to an FS Club event. This is what we call a BizTech Huìhuà chat, which I'll explain in a moment. And the topic today is space. The final frontier provides an exciting future for our global community. And I have with us today Nick Flitterman, who's the managing partner of Portland Advisors, and Du Chongzhuang, the deputy director of the China Aviation Industrial Base. Now, you'll know me. I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Xi'an, and it really is a privilege for me to be able to introduce many of these FS Club webinars, which I can only do so because of the generosity, tolerance even, of our sponsors who allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. Now, these SDG BizTech Huìhuà chats are an online series of conversations designed to open dialogue and make connections among Chinese and European business people, scientists, and technologists of many disciplines. Each conversation in the series is to take a multidisciplinary, even multi-industry approach with roughly equal numbers of brief contributions from Chinese and European specialists, followed by a moderated discussion. 6 organizations have come together to support this: the China Development Institute, Bank of China, the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, the UCL Institute of Education, Confucius Institute for Schools, the LSE and Tsinghua University's Confucius Institute for Business London, and Xi'an Group, along with, especially today, our partners in Xi'an, in Shanxi Province, led by Tim Bojiao. So we strongly believe that long-term relations between China and Europe depend on a solid foundation of networks that facilitate dialogue. And even during periods of tension, the need to keep lines of discussion open is paramount. There are existing networks of dialogue, academic, political, environmental, business to business, but one area to strengthen is technology and finance combined networks. And 6 organizations believe that regular dialogue events would benefit both technology and finance professionals, as well as wider Chinese and European relations. So far, we've had ones on research and development, health, and now space, and the next one in the series is likely to be on the carbon markets. So that's me, having introduced things. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Nick Flitterman. Then we'll have a keynote address by Mr. Du, and a question and answer section at about 5 or 10 past 9, depending on how we go. May I ask you to please type questions into the GoToWebinar question facility, and I will be fielding those into a conversation with Mr. Du and with Nick. So please use that question and facility there, because I'm here with you and I won't be receiving emails or texts or anything like that. So with no further ado, Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning, this evening. Mr. Du, very nice to meet you too. So I'm Nick Flitterman, managing partner at Portland Advisors. We're going to talk today about space, the final frontier. I thought it was suitably titled, since everyone seems to recognize that phrase. Next slide, please. I'll just launch into the space side. Next slide, please. Thank you. A little bit about Portland, just to skip through. So we are a boutique financial advisory firm focusing on project and structured finance. I think there's 17 of us now, but we focus on, and we're all ex-senior investment bankers, and we focus in a number of traditional sectors: infrastructure, energy, mining. I lead the telecoms effort, and in particular on satellite. And next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. This gives us a flavour of the different sectors that we focus on. We are specialising in any infrastructure project where there's very large upfront capital expenditure, and our focus is providing incisive expert advice to our clients on raising significant debt quantum in each of these sectors. And as I say, I focus in the telecom sector. Next slide, please. Thank you. Where we work with governments, we work with borrowers, we work with lenders actually in a number of different aspects of the telecommunications sector. We cover fixed line and wireless, subsea cables, and in particular satellites, where over the last 15 years or so, myself and my team have been assisting what is predominantly early stage businesses raise significant capital for their satellite projects. I list a few of my clients here. Some of those names may be recognizable to you. Next slide, please. So, space. A little picture from Star Trek here. We tend to look up to the stars and wonder what's there. Well, I'm going to share some of the things that are up there and how they help us. For centuries, humans have actually looked to space and the stars for answers. The fascination is more than the philosophical. It's coupled with the need to solve problems here on Earth. Today, there are seemingly countless benefits and applications of space technology. Satellites, for instance, are becoming critical for everything from internet connectivity and precision agriculture to border security and archaeological study. So here are a few things that we're going to cover today: how it works and how it touches our lives. I've just mentioned a few there. A little bit about the space community. There's a lot of people, companies, people, scientists out there relying on space and satellites to assist us and make life better for us all. How are these projects and businesses financed, and what are the risks involved? And then a little bit at the end there about what's the future hold with the assistance of the satellite industry and space. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit how it works. A couple of simple diagrams. As I'm not an engineer, I'm a financier by background. I thought this might be suitable for this group. So effectively, the picture on the left shows that satellites are in fact relay stations in space for the transmission of voice, video, and data communications, and they're ideally suited to meet the global communications requirements of lots of different organizations because they provide economical, scalable, and highly reliable transmission services that easily reach multiple sites over a vast geographic area. Transmissions via satellite communications can bypass the existing ground-based infrastructure, which is often limited and unreliable in many parts of the world. The diagrams here show 4 stages: a signal going up from the ground, bouncing off the satellite, transmitted back to a ground equipment on the other side of the world, and then passed around the terrestrial infrastructure in its destination departure. You can see here also on the right-hand side an example of how a satellite in orbit, and that's typically geostationary orbit, which I'll explain shortly, provides a large footprint over the Earth, enabling signals and communications to take place over a significant area with very little delay. And we'll come on to that in a little bit longer. Next slide, please. So there are many different orbits in space, and actually the space is quite crowded with satellites, but they are located in lots of different orbits, distances from the planet. And so for those concerned about too many satellites and then bumping into each other, there's a lot of space out there. These are the 3 typical orbits that you may hear in your day-to-day lives and hearing about the various constellations that are taking place. LEO being low Earth orbit, much closer to Earth, very short delays in communications between the Earth and the satellite. MEO, medium Earth orbit satellites, which cover a wider area of footprint, and then geostationary. And they are at 36,000 kilometers and appear to be fixed and they rotate at the same speed as the Earth rotates. So they're very good for broadcast. They are very stable transmissions. So those are the 3 typical orbits you hear about. The services diagram to the right. So we have fixed satellite services which are typically used to provide stable internet connectivity from geostationary orbit on the basis that the ground receiver is fixed in location and does not need to move because the geostationary satellite is pointing at it constantly, suitable for internet connectivity and other similar stable services. And we have MSS, mobile satellite services, where the receiver is moving constantly. You might think of satellite phones where the receiver is moving around, and these are taking signals from low Earth orbit, where the satellites are much closer to the Earth and able to move, have a shorter delay, but what it requires is a receiving antenna that is able to point to phase and to track satellites at a lower orbit. And then the broadcast satellite services, which is more your satellite television, also from geostationary orbit, where small amount of data is able to be squirted over vast areas of the region, and that's very suitable for the geostationary orbit. Next slide, please. So, what is going on up there, and how many satellites really are there active? Over the last 60 years or so, there have been many thousand satellites launched. Today, according to this visual from the Visual Catalyst, which was done during the course of last year, there are approaching 2,000 satellites in orbit at these various different orbits, LEO, MEO, GEO, and others. Over 1,000 of them are what we call communication satellites, and that they are providing internet and connectivity, IoT, which is Internet of Things connectivity, machine to machine talking, effectively transmitting without human intervention, and telephony as well, all communication satellites. So well over 60%. We also have nearly 500 satellites observing the Earth for good, for environmental reasons, for border monitoring, agriculture, and I guess also for, in some cases, government services. Everyone is likely to use their sat-nav in their car. There's nearly 100 satellites providing navigation services. And then there's research and development and other typical other satellites that are being used for scientific purposes. And the number of those are increasing as government participation across the world is increasing. You will hear about the future in the next couple of slides, but more and more satellites are being put into orbit, or at least being planned to serve what seems to be an insatiable demand for data across the world. Satellites being a great mechanism for transmitting data and giving internet connectivity to those where terrestrial infrastructure just simply isn't viable commercially. Amazon is one of the latest companies to plan to use satellite to deliver connectivity, increase their customer base, and to facilitate the use of drones and drone delivery with always-on connectivity for their services. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. I'll move for me. Sorry, yeah, okay, thank you. So it's space. It is big business. So there's a lot of satellites out there. There's also a lot of businesses involved in the sector. Nearly $400 billion of economic activity, according to Bryce Space and Technology in the middle of last year. Not all of it is from the satellite industry itself, but they are using the space as part of their service delivery. But well over $270 million actually is the size of the satellite industry. Largely satellite services like television and radio and broadband, but also there's significant terrestrial involvement in the industry, with over 130 billion on gateways, which is the equipment on the ground to receive the signal from the satellite operation centers, and of course, significant spend on consumer equipment to receive signals and make use of these satellite signals. The satellite manufacturing component of this, so the manufacturers all over the world, is over $12 billion. Likewise, the launch industry is growing fast. Previously, the launch services were provided by government entities, but there is now many private launch services who SpaceX and Amazon and others providing much more cost beneficial and availability to the private sector, the burgeoning satellite industry and private sector, as businesses in the sector expand very quickly. So, very big business. Next slide, please. And so, with all this money being generated economically, what are all the various activities that are taking place, the types of companies involved? Well, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but Seraphim Capital, a major equity player in the market, based here in the UK, provide regular updates on the state of the industry. And this is one of their slides, really interesting, I thought, to share the different types of companies and the types of services that are being provided, not just the satellite infrastructure and the operators of those satellites, which you can see down in the bottom left-hand corner, providing Earth observation and telecoms and IoT networks, but the launch service providers, the hardware themselves, and downstream, all the various companies that are using those satellite services to deliver data services, data platforms, location tracking, mapping, everything we use day to day in our lives is going on behind the scenes that we have no visibility of. A huge business and significant potential. So not just commercial though, but also scientific and research and development activities all going on using the space infrastructure funded in a way that I shall now share with you. Next page. Yeah. So where is all this money coming from? Well, similar to other typical infrastructure sectors around the world, there is certainly a place for both equity and debt in providing all these, providing this space economy for us. On the equity side, whilst it has traditionally been the place of the strategic operators, so the businesses themselves to invest in their own business, raising capital, over the last, I'd say, 10 to 15 years, the equity markets have eyed the satellite industry as a real potential for return generation. And we've seen a higher and higher amount of participation from venture capital and seed funds, particularly well across the world actually. Silicon Valley in the US, from the venture sources in Europe and Asia, all at all stages of equity investment rounds. The traditional players are now starting to play in the satellite sector, which is really interesting to see. By comparison to other sectors, it's not the largest, but there are certainly with the pandemic and other situations that the global economy is facing, the communication sector and the satellite sector in particular is seeing a resurgence, if you like, and a real appetite for investors. On the lending side, you can see here I've suggested a mix of public and private sector involvement in the satellite space. Usually these are for the larger infrastructure projects within the sector, typically single satellites or large constellations of satellites. But all these entities are getting involved in funding businesses up and down the value chain. Export credit agencies, the government agency, effectively supporting the national export of equipment to businesses in the sector. Development finances have been very active in the sector, satellite and satellite connectivity being right in the sweet spot of developmental aspects of growing economies, where communications infrastructure is key to economic growth. And of course, the more traditional sources of debt, commercial lending and the capital markets and bond issuances come into play, where risks are slightly more mitigated, but there's a significant amount of funds being placed from traditional sources, and these are now evident in many of the projects that I'm seeing. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Sorry, there's a short delay here on my side.
We're all seeing space. Isn't it all a bit risky, Nick?
Thank you. Okay. So, yeah, thank you. So space it is all a bit risky, isn't it? But actually, the space industry and those funding the space industry, you might think are somewhat concerned about, particularly about the technical aspects. How does one, once the satellite's in orbit, it's not like a real estate project or business where you can take security over this and step in and own an asset you can touch and feel. Once the satellite's in orbit, surely, isn't it hard to recover any money or get your returns? But no, both debt and equity sources have become over the years much more comfortable with the technical aspects. I list a few ways in which the industry has responded and meant to ensure that those funding the various elements of the infrastructure can get comfortable with the risks involved. Heritage, lots of testing, redundancy on the satellites, they provide warranties. There's also a significant amount of insurance covering the satellite space, a lot of capacity in the market, not just for launch. So launches unfortunately do go wrong sometimes. It's rocket science after all, but actually for ensuring the satellite in orbit, where things sometimes do go wrong, but not often. And to some extent, there's a level of revenue assurance that the insurance market can provide to give lenders a bit of comfort, but that if things don't quite go so well commercially, there's recourse to a third party pool of funding. The key risks, I think, really are around the market, where infrastructure, the lenders are lending into projects that are pre-revenue. There's certainly a business proposition that is viable. Market consultants are opining that there's interest in the market being targeted. But lenders are really focused on making sure that operators and borrowers are signing up customers well in advance of operation and generating sales that are certain to transpire once the satellite is operational. Coupled with managing regulatory risks, which is well understood by operators and lenders alike. Actually, they add to that financial structuring to ensure that if things don't go quite as smoothly as the management intend, that there are contingencies in place and restrictions placed on the businesses to ensure that lenders do get their money back. And whilst there have been a small number of issues in relation to financing in the sector, the large majority progress extremely well once they're financed. And so, whilst risk can be an issue, it's a highly understood industry, and one that the financial services industry is starting to get more and more comfortable with and attracting more and more interest. Next slide, please. I'm assuming you can see the pandemic slide. I'm not seeing that yet. But so not to go through this in too much detail, but actually the space sector has been absolutely critical during the recent pandemic. It has, how I've explained how it works, solved many problems. Governments and businesses have been able to use satellite services for informational purposes, for sensing, and for inspection of assets and essential services, providing essential services. I mentioned autonomous drones that Amazon really focused on, but they have actually already been starting to be used for provision of medical supplies. And so actually what happened is that the pandemic has shone a light on the satellite industry, communications in general, but on the satellite industry in particular. And it seems likely that the trends that we're seeing during the pandemic will continue and actually be used to leverage the growth in the satellite industry and space technology, such that it becomes even more part of our everyday life. Next slide, please. So what's next? Well, as I say, we're around 2,000 or over 2,000 satellites today. Already we know of large constellations that are going to come together largely in low Earth orbit to provide internet connectivity. And so Euroconsult, one of the large market consultants in the industry, predict approaching 10,000 satellites, operational satellites, by the end of 2028. Just demonstrating how much of a role satellites and the space industry will play in our lives across all these different segments, and how important it is to our global economy that this is a successful industry for the world. Next slide, please. And so finally, as I say, we look to the sky, we look to space, and now you know that we see thousands of different satellites providing services to us that we are little aware of, but hopefully following today's brief session, you are now slightly enlightened, and I'm happy to take any questions from Earth as well as from the final frontier. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, for that whistle-stop tour. And I think you're absolutely right. Too frequently we forget how large an industry it is, 366 billion. And yet you do frequently run into people in finance. And as they talk about major sectors, space doesn't come up as much as it ought to proportionately. Now, those slides are being posted, folks, so you'll be able to look at some of the detail that Nick's given you. But now, if I could, I'd like to hand over to our friends in Shanxi province, in Xi'an city. And this is Mr. Du, who is accompanied by Tim Bojiao. The floor is yours.
Okay. 好 ，Hello， 非常感谢这个 Michael 和 Nick 先生。
Thank you very much to Michael and Nick's wonderful speech today.
刚才 Nick 先生介绍了这个航天产业的发展前景和未来的人领科技的发展的一个趋势。
Nick just gave us a very wonderful speech about the bright future of the space technology and industry, and I really appreciate that.
我们通过 Nick 先生的演讲学到了，了解到了这方面全世界在航天领域的一个发展的一个现状和未来的一个趋势了。
Indeed, thank you very much to bring us with the new trend of the future development of the space technology for the world.
现在呢，中国还在过春节。
Now China is still having the spring festival. Everybody knows that.
所以在这里呢，我向主持人和这个参会的各位嘉宾，拜个晚年，祝大家新春愉快，万事如意。
So please allow me to take this opportunity to wish you all a very successful Chinese New Year, and wish you very success of your business and work and life.
在这里我也非常感谢伦敦金融城这个梅日梦副市长，以及泽源智库在线的这场对话，也感谢我们西安市外办中国联络处的协调沟通。
Yeah, thank you very much to Michael and also the Lion Group to organize this very important online dialogue. And thank you very much to Tim as well for the coordination.
我今天的发言主题是西安航空基地与欧洲企业深入合作的一个发展的前景。
Today, I would like to talk about the cooperation prospects for the aviation enterprises between China and Europe.
这个在中国有一句
Next
话，
slide, please.
中国的航空要看中国的陕西，陕西的航空要看西安市。
Next, please. So there is a very popular saying in China. The aviation industry is saying that China's aviation is looking at Shanxi, Shanxi's aviation is looking at Xi'an. Next slide, please.
这个西安如果跟欧洲的一个城市对比，非常像我们这个法国的图鲁兹在航空业。
So if we're going to make a metaphorical comparison, that you probably know one of the city in France is called Toulouse, which has a similar aviation industry to what Xi'an has.
西安航空基地呢，介绍一下，就是西安市政府的这个一个航空的专业化的工业园区。
Xi'an, just our aviation base, CAIB, just in one word, is the aviation base for Xi'an.
下面我介绍一下西安在中国拥有的航空资源。西安市汇集了全中国1/4的航空的总产值，1/3的航空的资产，以及1/4的航空从业人员。
So our aviation base has nearly a quarter of the total assets of the China total aviation industry. We also have a third of the overall production of the aviation industry of whole China, and also 1/4 of the overall employees of the industry in China.
西安的航空产业主要集中在 CAIB。 我们这里有这个发动机的中国的发动机的主要制造商，有中国的飞机的主要生产商 XAE 和 XAC， 是我们航空基地是西安市航空产业的一个主力的承载地。
So it could be said that our base is the only aviation base for Xi'an. We are also the major task force for Xi'an aviation industry. And our base is not only the manufacturer of engines or for the aircraft, but also the manufacturer base for the aircraft designing companies.
那么介绍一下我们这里拥有的一些企业和项目。一是我们的这个航空产业的基础非常雄厚，航空基地拥有全国最大的飞机制造商，刚才说了 XAC 和最大的飞机设计院，全国唯一的飞机的试飞鉴定中心和国家的航空科技孵化器。
Okay, so number one, we have a very strong aviation industrial foundation. Our aviation base has the largest aircraft manufacturing companies called XAC, and also the national only large and medium-sized aircraft designing institute, and also the only national flight testing experiment research center, and also the only national aircraft technology accelerator.
这个在这里我们从58年开始，先后研制了30多款飞机大家知道的像运20、飞豹、新舟60、新舟700都在这里诞生。另外在科研方面，中国的这个工程院院士有11位在这里进行航空产业的研究。
Our aviation base was started being established since 1958, and we had manufactured over 30 different models of aircraft, which probably you've heard of some of them: Y20, the GH7, the modern ARC 60, and the modern ARC 700, etc. And also we have over 10 national leading scientists. They are working here on the key projects.
我们第二个优势呢，这个航空基地啊，它的产业链非常的完善。目前呢 ，CIB 已经拥有了2400多家的企业。从近15年来，我们总共投资超过了1000亿，已经形成了从飞机设计、生产制造、试飞鉴定、教育培训为一体的一个完整的航空产业链条。
Yeah. So can you turn to the next slide, please? Number 2 is that we have a very complete industrial chain that within our aviation base, we already have over 2,400 enterprises established here, and the overall investment is already exceeding 100 billion RMB. So we have a whole complete industrial chain, including aircraft design, manufacturing, production, test flights, education and training.
那么 CIB 在全国这个航空产业制造这个综合的实力啊，无论从生产设计到实验鉴定，这个在综合的各方面的能力是全国第一位的，排第一名的。
It's undoubtable that the CAIB as the aviation base is the number 1 aviation industrial base in China in terms of our manufacturing capability, in terms of our ancillary facilities capabilities.
这个第三个呢，我们与国际合作的这个是比较活跃的。航空基地啊，这个从1979年上市，1997年就开展了与波音、空客、机翼、罗罗20多个国家的航空企业进行合作。目前我们的航空转码量占了中国的总份额的50%。
Next slide, please. So number 3 is that we do have a very dynamic international cooperation. So ever since 1979, our CAIB already started establishing international cooperation with international firms including Boeing, Airbus, GE, HP, Rolls-Royce, those companies from over 20 different countries, and also our subcontracts production is taking up over 50% of the market share of the whole China.
除此之外，航空基地与英国、法国、德国、捷克等我们的航空协会都保持了长期密切的沟通。我们也希望搭建这个一个渠道啊，成为中英两国、中法和其他欧洲国家一个合作的一个桥梁。
And also, we have been engaging international cooperation with Britain, France, Germany, Czech Republic, etc. And also, particularly today, we would like to just establish a communication bridge for the SME aviation companies between China and Europe.
在这里呢，我想跟大家分享一下中国航空产业发展的这么一些未来发展的一些前景和数据。
Next slide, please. Also today, please allow me just to give you some economic and industrial data to introduce about the current economic tide and the aviation industry development trend.
2020年呢，中国的 GDP 这个突破了101万亿吧，人民币，同比增长了2.3%。那么我们航空基地整个航空这个产业的 GDP 呢，达到了这个323亿，同比增长了40.1%。
Next slides. In the year 2020, that China's GDP has already reached 101.6 trillion Chinese RMB, which is an increase of 2.3% year on year. And also our aviation base, so GDP, also reached 32.341 billion RMB, which is a 14.1% year on year.
所以呢，我们的这个 CIB 的 GDP 的增长更代表了中国这个航空产业的一个增长的一个速度。
And it could be said that this growth rate represents the China's aviation industry growth rate.
这个还有一组数据也可以跟大家分享啊，这个中国的商飞公司预测了未来20年这个全球的客货机的这个总需求量达到39000多架，其中中国新增的民机数量达到8600架，占了全国市场的22%。中国民机的这个增长将成为全球民用航空增长最快的市场。
Next slide, please. So at the same time, I would also like to share another data with you. That's according to the COMAC, the China Commercial Aircraft Company, that in the following 20 years, China's total demand for the passengers and cargo flights could reach over 39,210 flights, within which the newly increased civil aircrafts could increase over 6,600 flights, which will take up nearly 22% of the global market. Let's say that will be the most fastly growing market within the global aviation industry.
中国大家都知道，中国有14亿的人口，所以呢，目前呢，它的人均拥有的这个飞行数量、飞行的次数、飞行的架势，在全世界的还没有达到全世界的平均数，所以未来它的增长空间是非常大的。如果中国的人均飞行的次数接近了英国和美国，那是一个非常大的数字。
So at the moment, our population is 1.4 billion, but on an average per capita, the flight data is hugely lower than the standard of the Europe and United Kingdom. But we could imagine that how huge the potential for the development could be. So imagine if we could improve the level of China into Britain and America, and that would be unimaginable size of market for the international aviation industry.
商飞生产的 C919这款飞机目前正在试飞当中，即将通过的适航认证啊，目前已接受的订单超过了1000余架。最迟呢，我们估计啊，在今年会投入量产。
One of the very famous, our star product is the C919 aircraft. It's still in the testing stage, but the overall purchasing order is already exceeding 1,000 flights. And by latest at the end of 2021, it will enter into quantity production, and the objective will be 100 flights per year.
中国航空市场是非常大的，那么我们也希望通过中国的大市场，加强与英国和欧洲在航空领域的合作。
So next slide, please. So we can see that the market of China's aviation industry is huge. That's why we would like to just propose and promote the international cooperation with Britain, with Europe, with the rest of the world.
中英两国呢，在航空领域的合作呢，各有自己的优点和长处啊，我们是非常互补的两个市场。
So with regards to the markets in China and in UK, which we are very complementary, and that's why we have huge potential for cooperation.
中国呢，刚才讲了，中国的市场非常大，未来增长的速度也非常快。那么这是中国的长处。那么在航空制造业来讲，在中国是一个成长刚刚发展的一个产业，它的历史是比较短的，与欧洲相比，它的历史是比较短的。所以我们需要向英国、像法国这样的历史悠久的航空制造国家学习他们的技术。
As I just mentioned, that the Chinese market is big, the growth rate is fast. That's one of the advantages of the Chinese aviation manufacturing industry. But On the contrary, that because we have a very short history, that's why we need to learn from UK, from France, from the rest of the European countries, which that we could work together on many different projects.
另外呢，也可以加强双方的这个中国和英国之间的这个转包生产的份额啊，增加这个相应的转包生产的份额。同时呢，我们可以产品的扩大英国在航空领域产品对中国的出口。
So we could increase the cooperation between China and UK through the subcontract production to increase the UK's product market share in China, to increase the export of the British products into China.
还有一个呢，就是2019年呢，航空基地建成了这个我们的综合保税区，目前呢已成为中国这个最为专业的航空的综合保税区。我们也希望这个 CAIB 的综合保税区成为中英两国航空领域合作的一个新的一个平台。
Can you just skip a couple of slides to the slides, page 15, please? So, just in November 2019, that the Xi'an Aviation base bonded zone was officially sealed for operation. That will be the gateway of our aviation base to keep opening up and to do international cooperation.
第三，我也提一个建议啊，这个在中国的航空市场有一个领域是一个特别新兴领域，就是通用航空市场。我们也希望加强与英国和欧洲国家在空航领域进行合作。
So there's another point that I would like to make to propose for us to cooperate. That is about paying attention to the general aviation market. So through expanding the cooperation within the domain of general aviation, that will give us a huge space for the cooperation between UK and China.
西安呢是中国这个通用航空的这个试点地区，同时呢也是中国通用航空的这个示范城市。目前 CAIB 拥有2个通航机场，在西北地区是我们飞行的量是在中国的西北地区，我们的飞行量是最大的。
So Xi'an City, basically our CAIB aviation base, is the general aviation demonstration zone. We are also the pilot park for the China first general aviation industry. So at the moment we're managing 2 civil airports, within which our airports has the largest flying quantities amongst China's market.
我们希望呢，就是在空航领域，在通航飞机的设计、通航的运营服务，包括通航机场的运营管理等方面，与英方展开务实的合作。
So we would like to work together with our UK and European counterparties within the airport design, the airport management, and also the airport operation. So we're welcoming your thoughts.
另外借今天的机会啊，我也提2点建议，针对我们双方的合作渠道提出2点建议。
So can you turn to the slides 19, please? I would also like to make 2 proposals to 2 points that we could work on specifically for our cooperation.
首先呢，CIB 呢是中英两国航空工作组的成员单位，每年也会参加中国商务部和英国国际贸易部组织的各种交流。那么我们也非常高兴地邀请像耐克这样的这个所在的这个金融单位啊，金融投资机构到我们中国来看一看投资中国的航空企业。
So turn to the slides 20. First of all, CAIB is also a member company to the China UK aviation industry workforce, that every year under the management of China Department of Commerce and also the UK DIT, they have been arranging and organizing a lot of communication, but we specifically would like to sincerely invite the City of London, Diane Group, Michael, and Nick, the European SME companies, to participate in the communication. We also would like to invite you to invest into our aviation base. If you could invite some companies and friends to come and visit, we really welcome you.
刚才呢，耐克讲了他所在的金融机构关注的世界的这个航天的市场。其实呢，中国的航空市场也是一个增长快速的产业。目前呢，在中国资本市场，航空板块呢是增长是非常迅速的。去年中国资本市场的航空板块的股票的价格涨幅超过了30%，是一个非常热门的一个投资领域。
So just now, Nick mentioned about the space technology, which is really interested by the capital markets. In actual fact, about China's aviation industry is also beloved by the capital markets. And with regards to the stock and share prices within the aviation industry sector, that the stock shares has been growing over 30%, which is really hot for investment.
所以我们也欢迎英国的这个投资基金、投资机构来航空基地投资中国的航空制造公司、航空制造厂。
So we really welcome you to invest the investment funds, the capital markets, the private equity, or to enter China to invest in our aviation base.
第二个建议呢，去年呢 ，CIB 建设了这个西安航空大数据中心。那么注册企业可以在通过这个系统撮合，实现中英两国的产能共享、供需对接。目前呢，已经入驻的中方企业达到了1000多家，能够联通的掌握的产能设备有3000余套。我们也希望为欧洲的相关企业提供免费的入驻，展示技术，同时呢，通过大数据中心撮合中英两国企业在航空领域的合作。
So secondly, that our CAIB aviation base has also established the Xi'an Aviation Big Data Center through our online platform that you could publish your production and demand information, the production of your equipment, etc. And at the moment, we have already over 1,000 companies registered through our platform. And also we have under control over 3,000 different sets of production equipments. So we are willing to provide relevant services for the European enterprises and UK companies to register onto our platform to demonstrate your technology, your capability, your market demand, etc., etc. So we can explore the potential cooperation and partners.
这个中国拥有非常广阔的这个航空市场和旺盛的这个航空需求啊。英国为代表的欧洲企业拥有优秀的研发设计能力和这个优秀的制造能力。我们希望航空基地能够成为中英两国合作在航空领域的一个非常好的渠道。我们也愿意为英国的人士、英国的企业进入中国提供便利。
So we know that China has such a huge market and a strong domestic demand and international demand, and UK and Europe has a lot of good companies that are really good at scientific research, design, and manufacturing. So we would like to work together to invite your companies to come and invest and expand your business in China, in Xi'an. We would like to provide relevant business services to your personnel, to your companies to come to China in Xi'an.
我也去过非常 非常多次啊，非常多的次数去过英国，对英国的这个文化，对英国航空产业的发展也是感到由衷的钦佩啊，也留下非常美好的印象啊。我也希望我们英国的各位这个朋友们能到这个中国来，到中国的西安来。
So I myself been to UK, Britain for many times. I really like the culture. I really admired your aviation industry's capability, and I had very good impressions on friends and the country of UK and Europe. And I really welcome friends from UK and Europe to come to China again and to come to visit us in Xi'an. We'll be looking forward to receive you in Xi'an.
希望我们能够成为朋友，我也愿意，这个成为这个英国朋友在西安的这个一个熟悉的、能够提供帮助的人士。
I myself would like to make my commitment to you that I would like to be friends with you, and please take me as your friend too, and I'll be the person in Xi'an for all the friends from UK and Europe. When you visit Xi'an, I'll be the first person to contact for whatever reasons.
我们能够一起战胜疫情，实现这个中英两国经济的腾飞。
And I do believe that through our cooperation as friends, we could help the UK and China and Europe's economic revival in a very short time. We can fight the pandemic.
谢谢。
Thank you very much.
Well, Fei Chang Hao, Xie Niman. We've really run over time, and I've got quite a few questions. Folks, all of your questions will be sent to both Nick and Mr. Du. But just if we can answer very quickly, I've got a couple for Nick and then a couple for Mr. Du. Nick, a lot of people here interested in debris. So Bob McDowell points out, how satellite debris address. Rupert Stubbs says one growing area of risk is the collision and debris potential, especially in the relatively low Earth orbit space. What can be done to manage collective risk here? And Rhonda Ocha is kind of curious which party accepts liability or responsibility should a satellite fall to Earth. Maybe you could just pick that up from an investment point of view.
Yeah, okay, so very, very briefly then, because I know we're short of time. So in terms of falling to Earth, actually it's very likely that satellites will actually burn up in the atmosphere before, so there would be very low probability of any accidental damage, if you want to call it, of debris or any space material causing issues for people on Earth. In terms of debris, yes, there's a lot of publicity and press coverage on debris and issues in space. But actually, this is one of the areas of development that is happening right now. Significant number of companies are springing up specifically to tackle these issues. In fact, there's one called Astroscale that I'm working with, Japanese a company expanded into the US that is focused predominantly on collaborative working with governments to assist in the collection of debris, and operators through their sponsoring governments are also charged as part of their licensing to ensure that any end-of-life satellites are very carefully monitored and efficiently removed from their orbit and disposed of without causing debris.
Yeah, there are quite a few comments in here as well about from Bob McDowell on the regulatory principles. Ian Taylor concerned about government monitoring and regulation. We've got some comments here from Robert Woodthorpe Brown pointing out the issues to do with weaponizing of space. And an interesting question or two as well about are these geopolitical risks so large that the retail investor should stay away? But this is a question to both speakers from Ian Harris. Could you provide a feeling for the amount of additional investment required in satellite infrastructure to make the idea of ubiquitous autonomous vehicles for passenger and goods transport a reality? Any quick comments on the rough numbers that might how that might impact some of your dynamics. Nick, I'll turn to you quickly, and then I'll let Mr. Du pick that up also.
Yeah. So very quickly. So this is really the pot at the end of the rainbow that the LEO constellations are chasing. Amazon, SpaceX, Telesat, OneWeb. They're all providing significant connectivity over low Earth orbit constellations with real focus on mobility. So that's cars and that aviation and ships. And so this is really the target. And so in the next I guess 4 or 5 years, you're going to see a lot more of activity in this domain. Billions is the answer. Billions of dollars are being poured into the industry with that as a target. Probably double digit plus, well, significantly double digit plus.
Tim, Mr. Du, any comments on that?
对您这个有什么想法要讲吗？
我就想问问赖先生，这个航天的目前呢，这个要发射的卫星很多，不知道您是否了解我们的这个天空上最多能容纳多少颗卫星？就是这个市场的最大容量是多少
？Sorry, Mr. Du has a question for Nick. So with regards to this, the space technology, especially about the satellites, the numbers of the satellites in our space, do you know that, or do you have any idea that what is the maximum capacity of our space could accommodate the overall number of the satellites that we could launch and send over to the space? Can you give any feedback on that, please?
So it's a very good question, and actually the answer is not. It's probably one for an engineer or a scientist, but I think the simple answer is I don't think there's one specific number. We have multiple orbits. We're not running out of space in space just yet. Plenty of room for the expansion, but it does raise the question, which has been quite rightly raised from participants, that it's about operators being responsible with the burgeoning number of satellites that we will need and use, but with being responsible to each other and to space, such that the overpopulation of space doesn't happen in a way that's detrimental to everyone on Earth and the environment.
Well, it's a good one. As the universe is expanding, Nick, they're making more of it. So yeah. That's good. And a very final question, Tim and Mr. Du. Hugh Purser is curious if you could comment on what is China doing in terms of research and development into electronic commercial aircraft.
问题问的是中国对于这个就是人工智能或者智慧的这种航天机械航天飞机这一块是怎么样的有什么样的这种想法或者是规划？
现在因为中国也在推进就是人工智能，包括这个自动驾驶领域，也是在全力支持它的发展，尤其是在几个方向，一个是就是我们这次会议的主题是航空航天上，另外在汽车就是智能驾驶上，也在全力的去研发技术。那么中国的政府也是非常支持这方面的投入。目前有一些标杆的企业也在做投入大家说这个新能源汽车当中，我们知道的像这个百度像这个比亚迪都在大量的投入，政府也是非常支持他们。另外在航空上，那么中国的这个商飞在智能驾驶上也在进行相关的研究。同时呢，我们的航天领域，中国的航天科技集团等相应的单位也在进行大量的投入和研究。总的方向就是中国政府非常支持，在这方面是我们未来发展的一个重要的一个科技领域。
Yeah, absolutely. With regards to the intelligence aviation and also the unmanned aircraft, that China is investing a lot of resources and into this industry. The Chinese government is extremely supportive of this direction, and development. We do have some leading companies, especially about the new energy, renewable energy, including Baidu, including BYD, and the China COMAC, the China Commercial Flights Corporation, is also leading the research with this regard. And the overall direction is absolutely the Chinese government is quite supportive to the further development and research, especially with international corporations, to explore new possibilities. But that's what we are doing at the moment. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, sadly, that's all we have time for, and I'm getting in a number of comments and saying interesting and thank you for your insights, and all these will be passed on. I have 3 quick rounds of thanks in the time available. My first is, of course, to our FS Club sponsors. Without them and their tolerance to allow us to range widely and freely, this wouldn't be possible today. So thank you. I'd also like to thank the audience. Just a quick look ahead. There are quite a few things. As ever, the simplest thing to do is go to the website and find things. But we do, in fact, have another FS Club function this afternoon. Tuttle's all the way down, really looking at the deep ICT plumbing of financial services. But most importantly, I would like to thank Nick and Mr. Du and Tim for coming over today. We are really proud of having this BizTech Huìhuà chat series, and we do hope to do a number of these coming up. The next one will be probably on the carbon markets, hopefully sometime in March. We thank our sponsors there for their support, which has allowed us to pull together these sort of deeper dialogues. Unfortunately, Mr. Du, Tim, Nick, I'm unable to open, despite technology, the floodgates of applause, but I have brought with me, those of you in the FS Club will know, I keep a portable karmic Korean clapper here, which will have to serve for applause. So thank you very much today. And we look forward to perhaps visiting you in what I've come away with is Xi'an is the Toulouse or the Seattle of China. And we hope to come over and visit you. And likewise, Nick and I would welcome both of you over here in London when we're all able to travel again. Thank you so much for your time this morning.